Consider a 4th of July orator who goes on bombastically about our great and blessed country, whose founding fathers, under divine guidance, created a new beginning for mankind. This is surely humbug. As Black's account suggests, the orator is not lying. He would be lying only if it were his intention to bring about in his audience beliefs that he himself regards as false concerning such matters as whether our country is great, whether it is blessed, whether the founders had divine guidance, and whether what they did was in fact to create a new beginning for mankind. But the orator does not really care what his audience thinks about the founding fathers or about the role of the deity in our country's history or the like. At least it is not an interest in what anyone thinks about these matters that motivates his speech. It is clear that what makes 4th of July oration humbug is not fundamentally that the speaker regards his statements as false. Rather, just as Black's account suggests, the orator intends these statements to convey a certain impression of himself. He is not trying to deceive anyone concerning American history. What he cares about is what people think of him. He wants them to think of him as a patriot, as someone who has deep thoughts and feelings about the origins and the mission of our country, who appreciates the importance of religion, who is sensitive to the greatness of our history, whose pride in that history is combined with humility before God, and so on. Black's account of humbug appears then to fit certain paradigms quite snugly. Nonetheless, I do not believe that it adequately or accurately grasps the essential character of bullshit. It is correct to say of bullshit, as he says of humbug, both that it is short of lying and that those who perpetrate it misrepresent themselves in a certain way. But Black's account of these two features is significantly off the mark. I shall next attempt to develop, by considering some biographical material pertaining to Ludwig Wittgenstein, a preliminary but more accurately focused appreciation of just what the central characteristics of bullshit are. That is an excerpt from On Bullshit by Harry G. Frankfurt. I found this book in the philosophy section of a Barnes & Noble one day, and I thought, oh, this is a nice short little book. This was a few years ago. I thought, oh, I can read this pretty quickly, and it might be an interesting little read. I sat down to read it in the Barnes & Noble. It's the kind of book you can just read in one sitting, really thin, and I thought it was like satire. Like, I thought this book was just bullshit about bullshit. I thought it was a joke book. But then like halfway through, I realized it's really like an academic paper. I thought maybe it is. And I looked it up, and it is really an essay by a philosophy professor. He actually is just trying to kind of nail down what bullshit is. And in the beginning, he says, kind of his mission of the book, my aim is simply to give a rough account of what bullshit is and how it differs from what it is not. Or, putting it somewhat differently, to articulate more or less sketchily the structure of its concept. So it is really a book just trying to nail down what bullshit is. It's a term that we use all the time. It's a really relevant thing in our world, I think even more and more in the past 10, 20 years since this was written. But like he says in the book, people haven't really nailed down exactly what it means, partly because every individual person tends to have a good confidence that they have a good BS detector, like a radar, to detect BS. And that's part of what prevents people. People tend to think of bullshit as, oh, it's, something I don't have a high tolerance for. I don't believe bullshit, but it's all around us all the time. And a lot of people, in general, it's just not something that's really nailed down exactly what it is. So he talks about humbug and this guy named Black, who wrote a paper about humbug and that term, and he goes through what that term means, and then he goes on to bullshit, and he talks about what is it, exactly. Is it lying, like intentionally misleading, or is it more like joking? Or what's the structure of its concept? He asks the question. So it's very thorough in its analysis of what bullshit is. He goes into when someone's speaking, there's multiple layers to what they're saying. There's, the knowledge they have in their head, what they want the person they're speaking to know. Are they hiding that knowledge from someone? That would fall under the categorization of lying, intentionally misleading someone, intentionally hiding facts from someone. But then there's another layer of, is the person's motivation to even transmit knowledge? And that's outside of whether you're lying or not. Whether you're, like in this example of a 4th of July orator I just read, he focused in on the fact that sometimes people talk, especially politicians. That's a great example. It's probably the best example. It's all around us. Politicians speaking, the motivation is not to transmit any knowledge or wisdom. It's just to give an impression to someone that they have certain characteristics. The speaker has certain characteristics. So it's pretty thorough and academic, but it's really a quick read. I mean, I had to reread a lot of paragraphs like twice or 3 times. But as I kind of sped, sometimes I wouldn't understand a paragraph and I speed along to the next few, and then I, understand the whole point he's making. Later on, he says, in Eric Ambler's novel, Dirty Story, a character named Arthur Abdel Simpson recalls advice that he received as a child from his father. Although I was only 7 when my father was killed, I still remember him very well and some of the things he used to say. One of the first things he taught me was, never tell a lie when you can bullshit your way through. This presumes not only that there is an important difference between lying and bullshitting, but that the latter is preferable to the former. Now, the elder Simpson surely did not consider bullshitting morally superior to lying, nor is it likely that he regarded lies as invariably less effective than bullshit in accomplishing the purposes for which either of them might be employed. After all, an intelligently crafted lie may do its work with unqualified success. It may be that Simpson thought it easier to get away with bullshitting than with lying, or perhaps he meant that, although the risk of being caught is about the same in each case, the consequences of being caught are generally less severe for the bullshitter than for the liar. In fact, people tend to be more tolerant of bullshit than of lies, perhaps because we are less inclined to take the former as a personal affront. We may seek to distance ourselves from bullshit, but we are more likely to turn away from it with an impatient or irritated shrug than with the sense of violation or outright outrage that lies often inspire. The problem of understanding why our attitude toward bullshit is generally more benign than our attitude toward lying is an important one, which I shall leave as an exercise for the reader. The pertinent comparison is not, however, between telling a lie and producing some particular instance of bullshit. The elder Simpson identifies the alternative to telling a lie as bullshitting one's way through. This involves not merely producing one instance of bullshit, it involves a program of producing bullshit to whatever extent the circumstances require. This is a key, perhaps, to his preference. Telling a lie is an act with a sharp focus. It is designed to insert a particular falsehood at a specific point in a set or system of beliefs in order to avoid the consequences of having that point occupied by the truth. This requires a degree of craftsmanship in which the teller of the lie submits to objective constraints imposed by what he takes to be the truth. It says, the liar is inescapably concerned with truth values. In order to invent a lie at all, he must think he knows what is true. And he goes on to talk about how bullshitting is an art, and it's kind of a program that someone, it's a way of behaving. And a liar has to at least believe in a certain truth about something and intentionally swerve around it and give someone something else, the falsehood. But a bullshitter just doesn't even care about what the truth is. And they don't even have to care if they don't even have to care if there is truth. Bullshitting is more of a just a behavior and a way of being almost. So near the end, he says, the contemporary proliferation of bullshit also has deeper sources in various forms of skepticism which deny that we can have any reliable access to an objective reality, and which therefore reject the possibility of knowing how things truly are. These anti-realist doctrines undermine confidence in the value of disinterested efforts to determine what is true and what is false, and even in the intelligibility of the notion of objective inquiry. One response to this loss of confidence has been a retreat from the discipline required by a dedication to the ideal of correctness to a quite different sort of discipline, which is imposed by pursuit of an alternative ideal of sincerity. Rather than seeking primarily to arrive at accurate representations of a common world, the individual turns towards trying to provide honest representations of himself. Convinced that reality has no inherent nature, which he might hope to identify as the truth about things, he devotes himself to being true to his own nature. It is as though he decides that since it makes no sense to try to be true to the facts, he must therefore try instead to be true to himself. But it is preposterous to imagine that we ourselves are determinate and hence susceptible both to correct and to incorrect descriptions, while supposing that the ascription of determinacy to anything else has been exposed as a mistake. As conscious beings, we exist only in response to other things, and we cannot know ourselves at all without knowing them. Moreover, there is nothing in this theory, and certainly nothing in experience, to support the extraordinary judgment that it is the truth about himself that it is the easiest for a person to know. Facts about ourselves are not peculiarly solid and resistant to skeptical dissolution. Our natures are indeed elusively insubstantial, notoriously less stable and less inherent than the natures of other things. And insofar as this is the case, sincerity itself is bullshit. So this is a quick academic level read, but it's entertaining, and it wasn't very hard for me to follow as a college dropout. I understood what he was saying, and it's nice to have it nailed down. Basically, he basically is saying that there's lying, which is telling someone something that you know to be false, and then there's bullshit, which is telling someone something without regard for the truth, without even caring what is true or false. And I find myself bullshitting, and I see it all around me in the world, and it's kind of helpful to have that clarified, I guess. And it's just a nice book to have on the bookshelf. It's like just a little tiny book. If someone picks it up, I can say, yeah, it is what it looks like. It's just kind of talking about bullshit for 45 minutes. And it's entertaining and funny. There's some funny little sentences in here and little stories. This basically just opened my mind to what the nuances of how people talk and how people, interact with truth in their speech. It's not as one-dimensional as I thought it was. Like, I'm either telling the truth or I'm lying. Page 33, it says, "It is in this sense that Pascal's statement is unconnected to a concern with truth. She is not concerned with the truth value of what she says. That is why she cannot be regarded as lying, for she does not presume that she knows the truth, and therefore she cannot be deliberately promulgating a proposition that she presumes to be false. Her statement is grounded neither in a belief that it is true, nor, as a lie must be, in a belief that is not true. It is just this lack of connection to a concern with truth, this indifference to how things really are, that I regard as the essence of bullshit." I think this book will just continue to get more and more relevant as the years go on. I don't think it's a controversial thing to say that bullshit is just more prevalent, ever more prevalent in the culture we live in. The culture of brands selling stories and identities instead of products. You look at like Apple. Steve Jobs talked about that. He was selling like an experience more than a product. And I think it seems like marketing and all kinds of different groups and programs that are advertised to us these days are selling us like a vision of reality or a worldview more than useful product or service. So I think bullshit is just really prevalent in our world. And this book helped me just clarify exactly what that is. This isn't just a random guy writing this. He's a well-known philosopher, Harry Frankfurt. He's pretty influential. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend buying this book, but if you see this in a bookstore, I encourage you to pick it up. You can read it in one sitting in the bookstore and then just put it back on the shelf. Pretty interesting stuff. Good food for thought on Bullshit by Harry Frankfurt.